Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And happy Thursday morning. It's Thursday, February 6, 2025. I know some of you are probably in the midst of dealing with a storm that's moving across the country. Here in Michigan, it's not too bad. We have some snow and some ice, but it really is interesting to me because I don't know about how it was when you were growing up, but when I was growing up, we never canceled school. I mean, it was just, it was like my mother would say, offer it up, put your boots on, and go out there. And it's just so different now. And so many schools were canceled this morning, so the kids get a day off because of the icy roads and whatnot. And I know you've got the, of course, people are very concerned about being in a litigious society, and God forbid something should happen on the road. But it is a mess out there in some areas, so do be careful. We'll give you the weather forecast in just a second. We do have the amazing Father Mitch Pacwa with us, as we do every Thursday for Cultural Connections. Now, he's the perfect person to talk about these big news stories that are going on after the announcement with President Trump and Bibi, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel, earlier in the week, where the president is talking now about a do-over for Gaza. Now, apparently not putting money into it or putting boots on the ground, but really opening up the discussion. And there's a lot of criticism being fired at the president. And there are some interesting discussions. I was trying to watch all kinds of things yesterday in preparation for the interview today and just to bring myself up on it. But there's something very interesting about this. Because if you know anything about that area of the country of the world, and Father Mitch has been there many times, and I've been to the Holy Land, I've been to Jordan, we've been to Turkey, my husband and I, and as pilgrims, you don't go as far south as the Gaza Strip, but you're certainly aware of the situation there and how difficult it is for the Palestinian people to be under these terrorist groups that are running the country, Hamas, and also Christians and the persecution, and now especially with the war and the way the area is just rubble. It's horrible in terms of the conditions and the way they're living. And so what about doing this differently? I don't know. And how do we approach this from a Catholic perspective with our Christian brothers and sisters there? So again, I really think Father Mitch, who's so well-versed in the Holy Land, in different countries, in history, is the perfect person to talk about this, to get us started on this conversation since the news broke earlier this week. So he joins us at 15 minutes past the hour. And then honored to have Tim Graham back with us. He's the executive editor of the Media Research Center's Newsbusters website. You should check it out, newsbusters.org, because it does a very good job of keeping us up on how the media twist stories. And it's amazing in terms of the amount of time they spend, the legacy media, still digging in their heels despite everything that's happened. Now, he's calling for a special piece that is on Newsbusters to defund public broadcasting. Stop them from getting all this money from the government, tax dollars, our tax dollars at work. And there are numerous problems, and he has 5 solid reasons, and these are very well documented in terms of why he's calling for defunding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And he will review those with us. You can find out more on newsbusters.org. So that is our program for today on a Thursday morning. We are so happy you're with us. And I want to say a big thank you to my friends at Guadalupe Radio, Debbie Georgiani, and also Toya Hall for allowing me to be on the air this morning to talk about a new EWTN book, Italy's Shrines and Wonders. And the guys from, of course, the morning show there, Morning Joy, we had a great time. And I believe they're doing a book giveaway. Yeah, they are. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to start, but they are. If you're in Guadalupe Radio territory, stay tuned very closely. Keep it there all the time because you have an opportunity to get a book. Alrighty then, let's talk about the weather. We have a series of storms impacting the central and eastern part of the country into early next week. Pacific storms continuing to impact the west. That's the headline from the National Weather Service. Now for more detail. A series of winter storms impacting the Midwest to the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast part of the country into next week, with locally heavy rain and a combination of snow, sleet, and freezing rain. Pacific storms continuing to bring strong winds, heavy rain with the risk for flooding to northern and central California, and heavy mountain snow in the Sierras, southern Cascades, and northern Rockies through tomorrow. Thanks again for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, almost 5 minutes past the hour. Let's get started with the news on a Thursday morning. At the Vatican, Christopher Wells tells us the Holy Father praying again for those suffering in nations torn apart by war, especially in the Middle East.
Although Pope Francis chose not to read his catechesis at the audience due to a cold, he decided to pronounce in his own voice his appeals for peace and prayer at the audience's conclusion.
Pensiamo ai paesi che soffrono la guerra.
Remembering once again the wars plaguing the world, Pope Francis said he thinks of the nations suffering from war, including Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine.
Ricordiamo gli sfollati della Palestina e preghiamo per loro.
Let us remember all the displaced people of Palestine, he said, inviting everyone to pray for them. During his remarks to Polish-speaking faithful, the Holy Father expressed his gratitude for all the Polish priests and religious who courageously serve in war-torn and poor nations, especially in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In remarks to Spanish-speaking pilgrims, Pope Francis invited them to entrust themselves to the Lord, as the Blessed Mother did, to keep hope, and to remember with gratitude the great works God has done in their lives. Finally, before imparting his apostolic blessing at the end of the general audience, Pope Francis greeted young people, the sick, the elderly, and newlyweds, encouraging them to be delighted by hope, strong in trials, persevering in prayer, and to commit themselves to helping their needy brothers and sisters. I'm Christopher Wells.
President Trump banning biological male athletes from taking part in women's sports.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
He signed an executive order yesterday at the White House, again, as you just heard, saying these sports will only be for women. The order directs the Department of Justice and other federal agencies to interpret Title IX rules as, again, banning men and boys who identify as women and girls from taking part in female sports. The order also requiring the immediate enforcement of these rules. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is backing President Trump's plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza.
This is the first good idea that I've heard. It's a remarkable idea, and I think it should be really pursued, examined, pursued, and done, because I think it will create a different future for everyone.
The idea announced by the president this week calls for the relocation of some 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Trump said the U.S. could oversee the clearing out of the destruction and the redeveloping of the region. Netanyahu telling Fox News yesterday again that there's nothing wrong with allowing Gazans who want to leave, and that if they choose later they can come back. The White House also says President Trump's proposal for Gaza is about moving forward in the Middle East. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the president made the decision about the proposal with a humanitarian heart for all people in that region.
The president is committed to eliminating Hamas and securing a lasting peace for the entire region.
On Tuesday, again, Trump said the U.S. should take over Gaza and Palestinians should move temporarily at least elsewhere. And Leavitt also said that he has not committed to sending troops to Gaza. Trump's suggestion, though, is receiving great backlash from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle as well as several world leaders. There is a bipartisan effort by 2 New York and New Jersey congressmen to reintroduce the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act on Capitol Hill. Here's Representative Mike Lawler, a Hudson Valley Republican.
We will not tolerate anti-Semitism or Jew hatred anymore. Enough with administrators who are too weak-kneed to take on the pro-Hamas radicals who have infested college and university campuses.
The congressmen are spearheading an effort on Capitol Hill requiring the Education Department to use a definition of anti-Semitism adopted by 43 countries when enforcing federal anti-discrimination laws. Pam Bondi is the country's new Attorney General. Bondi was sworn in yesterday after the Senate confirmed her.
I will restore integrity to the Justice Department, and I will fight violent crime throughout this country and throughout this world and make America safe again.
The vote earlier this week was 54-46, with Democratic Senator John Fetterman joining Republicans to vote in her favor. And Lisa Taylor tells us Argentina is now pulling out of the World Health Organization.
This comes after a similar move from President Trump last month. A spokesperson for Argentina's president said President Milei won't allow the WHO to intervene in our sovereignty, much less in our health. Trump also announced on his first day back in the White House that he was withdrawing the U.S. from the WHO, bringing criticism from public health experts. I'm Lisa Taylor.
The victims of last week's mid-air collision between a passenger jet and a military helicopter are being honored in Alexandria, Virginia. A vigil was held yesterday on the banks of the Potomac River where both aircraft went down, killing 67 people and leaving no survivors. And Brad Ford tells us that two planes actually collided on a taxiway at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport this week.
A Delta Airlines plane was parked at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport and waiting for de-icing when a Japan Airlines plane that was moving had a wingtip hit the tail of the Delta Airlines jet. No injuries were reported. The passengers were removed from both aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board will investigate the incident.
In the Lone Star State of Texas, lawmakers there are starting debate on a voucher program. That's causing a lot of controversy. State Senator Brandon Creighton says, though, it's a good thing because it will help low-income families escape at failing schools.
Students are trapped in public schools or education environments because of a zip code, and that's just not right.
His plan would allow parents to use their tax dollars to send their children to private school. The vote comes days after the governor, Greg Abbott, declaring the topic an emergency item during his State of the State address. And Americans are scrambling, so to speak, to find affordable eggs, with the price of a dozen increasing, as Natalie Migliori tells us, by 50% in the past year alone.
It all comes as egg supply dwindles and demand rises, while farmers across the United States battle a widespread bird flu outbreak.
Everything got a flu because everything went up. It's sad, and I don't see no going down in the future.
The average price of a dozen eggs is $5.29, up from $3.65 in November. Some people seeing even higher prices.
I used to pay like $4, now it's like $9. It's ridiculous.
Right now I saw it for $8.99 a dozen. I can't afford it.
The surge has even prompted Waffle House to add a 50-cent surcharge to every egg order.
It is a Thursday morning, February 6, 2025. Great to be with you here on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. For all the information on this program and so many others, you can go to EWTN.com. Speaking of which, our very own Father Mitch Pacwa joins us in just a few minutes, about 2 minutes to be exact, for our Thursday segments of Cultural Connections, getting his take on the announcement by the President regarding Gaza Strip. We'll be right back.
People ask how they can care for older family members who can't fully care for themselves. One answer is Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Visiting Angels assists adults nationwide with 600 locations to continue living at home and not have to move into a nursing home. Their caregivers provide assistance in hygiene, meals, and light housework. Services are provided up to 24 hours per day, and you can select your caregiver before service begins. More information, including franchise opportunities, is on the web at visitingangels.com.
This week on Christ is the Answer, Father John wants to talk about being transformed. The Eucharist, it's the source and summit of our lives as Christians. We know it to be Jesus himself, but do we know what Jesus is doing through this precious gift for us? Join us this week as Father John shows us how to pray like Jesus, as well as expounding on how through the Eucharist, Jesus transforms us to be more like him. Tune in for Christ is the Answer, Monday through Fridays at 11 a.m. on Ave Maria Radio.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
Remember to take a minute this week to thank a priest you know for all the blessings he shares through his vocation. Our priests work tirelessly to bring us the sacraments and help us on our journey to heaven. Let's encourage them and express our gratitude for all of their sacrifices, like thank you for baptizing our children. Nominate your priest at thankyouforyourpriesthood.com. A new contest every month through September 2025. Brought to you by Diocesan, your Catholic advertising and communications company.
This is the first good idea that I've heard. It's a remarkable idea. And I think it should be really pursued, examined, pursued, and done, because I think it will create a different future for everyone.
Of course, that is a soundbite that we used in the news as well of Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in an interview on Fox News reacting to the president's announcement over Gaza earlier this week. And I thought, gosh, I'm so grateful for the insight and the wisdom of our very own Father Mitch Pacwa, who has traveled the world and also has been to that part of the world in the Middle East so many times. Father, thanks so much for joining us. This was something that was a real head turner when you were hearing it, if you were watching the press conference live with Netanyahu, as I was earlier in this week. Your initial thoughts, Father, when you heard the announcement, and thanks for joining us on a Thursday.
My pleasure to be with you all again. A couple things. Everybody is correct in saying this idea for Gaza just sounds so wild, so new that it's hard to wrap your head around it. And my first impression is this. So far, it's still kind of a vague idea. There's not a huge amount of clarity about it. Lots more details have to be worked out because this is so new that you just don't know what this could possibly mean. It is not like any other proposal. Here's one of the other things, too. Gaza, a lot of folks don't know. I've not been there. It's not allowed. You can't go into Gaza if you're a visitor to Israel. There's just, so much that, you can do, and that's always been fenced off, blocked off, and just not something. And it was a security issue. There are some places where security has to be taken care of. So that's why I never got in there. It's just too dangerous. But here would be some of the questions. Well, as interesting as this idea might be, I have a number of questions. And I think these are after the initial shock, we have to ask, what do you do with the Palestinian people living there while you're trying to set up a new system? Where do they go? What do they do? What is feasible? These things the president hasn't spoken of. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have a plan, but it's certainly not something that he is able to clarify at this point. That needs to be clarified. There's no doubt. You have to figure out what kind of rule this would be if Americans are in charge of Gaza. What would that kind of government even look like? We don't know. And that would have to be clarified.
Boots on the ground yet. He hasn't said boots on the ground, and he hasn't said we're going to develop and we're going to do all this money. So that's still, but again, we have to have that clarified.
That's the stuff that needs to be made clear because, you have to have some form of government. This place has been a dangerous spot for some time now. So this has to be worked out. What are you going to do very concretely to figure out how this place is going to be run? You have to remember, the British tried to have rule over this place. Then the Egyptians had this as a protectorate up until the 1967 war, between Israel and the Arab allies. That famous war that was basically instigated by Russia. in 1967. And after that point, Israel got control of Gaza. They've had real difficulty ruling Gaza. That they had to pull out of Gaza, years ago. And I remember, because I don't think the Israelis had enough troops to be able to really keep peace. They had a number of settlements, and keeping, policing the place is not easy. It's just not. So what kind of government would there be in Gaza? That would have to be made much more clear. And are we looking to keep this like we have our own people in Puerto Rico, where they're U.S. citizens who live there? Or is it going to be something different? All these things have to be worked out. The other thing, too, you hear some folks already talking, well, this will be a fantastic military base for us to have. Why? Why is that going to be such a great place to have the military? We have to know that. Or will it be military? We don't know. That has to be clarified. What will they do? How will they do it? Why will they do it? All that has to be made much more clear than it is right now. That's one of the issues that has to be thought through. Now, he talks about it more as a place for business. I don't know if you've ever eaten Jaffa oranges.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay,
mm-hmm.
They come from there. This is also great land for agriculture. There are agricultural centers there that could be developed. But, I have to say, Hamas has been so focused on building tunnels and dealing with military concerns to have their own Palestinian base from which to take over Israel. That's been their focus, to have this Gaza as a base from which they would take over Israel. And that's why they've kept attacking there. And Iran encouraged this to go on.
Ask you, Father, because the situation for the people there, both, of course, obviously the Muslim population and even the Christians that are there, the small percentage of Christians, it's not a great place to live and prosper. I mean, let's be honest, it's a mess.
Right. Well, see, that's it.
And that's the thing. So perhaps, and I'm just putting this out there, and again, watching a lot and reading a lot yesterday in preparation for our interview, and even this morning, the conversation now is sounding a lot different than it was before. Because as you said, Blair tried to do it, he couldn't do it. So many people tried to fix this situation and try to come up with a two-state solution, which hasn't worked. And is this a more humanitarian approach to say, let's get everybody to the table to talk about this? Is that maybe what's behind this, do you think?
Well, see, this is one of the other things we know that President Trump does is he instigates a lot of conversation. He, the kind of questions I've just been raising have not been so made clear, but he instigates lots and lots of conversation so we can know what to do. That in itself is important. But what are his plans? And, it's something, that, like I said, the British have not done so well. The Arabs have not done so well in taking care of this circumstance. So what is going to be the result here? What are they going to do? We just don't know yet. Right. And that has to be discussed. I think it's an important discussion for lots of Americans to have, partly because we, are going to be involved in this the way Egypt and Britain once was. Mm-hmm. What will that look like? And we have to be part of that discussion. And, of course, the Palestinian people have to be part of this. Are they going to head off to be among their neighbors? Will the Saudis be part of all this? We don't know. That has to be clarified.
Right. Well, I think it's good to discuss this because it's been a very, very volatile area, dangerous area for the people there who have been persecuted in so many ways, right? And so I think it's worth talking about. More with Father Mitch Pacwa. By the way, Andrew just reminded me the President is speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast right now, but we'll continue our conversation on Gaza when we come back with Father Mitch Pacwa from EWTN. Stay tuned.
The initial announcement yesterday, I think, was greeted by surprise by many, but cheered by, I think, people all around the world. Why? Because that area is so dangerous. It's a bold move, certainly, far bolder than what's been done before, but I think we've got to stand unequivocally in an unwavering manner, as the whip said, with Israel, our closest ally and friend in the Middle East.
That is House Speaker Mike Johnson. The reaction yesterday regarding the President's announced it at a press conference with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on the Gaza Strip situation. So, Father, there's a lot of people who are in support of President Trump, whether they're conservative or wherever they are. Even some Democrats coming out in support of this. Very few, but of course most people on the right. Some people are questioning it, but they're taking it from a humanitarian approach, as the press secretary said yesterday, the White House press secretary. Because you and I were talking during the break, it's not even, and you described the situation in Gaza for the people there. It's not even squalor anymore. It's worse than squalor, especially since the war, correct?
Squalor would look good compared to what they've got right now. It is devastated. There are, we don't know precise figures for how many died, but it may well be somewhere about 50,000, maybe more. We just don't have the kind of information we need. But when I looked at the helicopter overview, Trump put it correctly. It looks like a wrecking demolition area. It's just been totally devastated. This is horrible. How do you rebuild from that? And here's one of the problems, very sadly to me, that the Hamas leadership has just spent so much more time on trying to put military issues, tunnels and things like this to attack Israel, that they have neglected the people and the needs for infrastructure. The electricity, the water. Water is a huge issue throughout that whole region, and they've got nothing. This is totally, totally devastating.
So you see some of these politicians saying they're moving, they're basically cleansing, the Palestinian people from that area. But what are the people who are saying that doing to help the people now? Because as you described, it's a nightmare in what they're living.
Exactly. And again, Hamas is not serving the people when they build tunnels that the Israelis quickly blow up. It doesn't. The Israelis find these tunnels and then destroy them. What is it that makes you think it's such a good idea to keep building more tunnels when you can't even, take care of the food and water, especially the food and the housing? This is a population that's been growing, and you're just not taking care of them. This is devastating, devastating. So I would like to see that as they, rebuild the area, that somebody has concern for the family people, the women and children. the situation that so many are in today is horrendous. What are you doing for these folks? That's my question. And and one of the questions that should be asked of President Trump, is your plan going to focus on the needs of Palestinian families and folks? And secondly, what will be their fate? Right, it's devastating to live in Gaza. There really is, nothing, for them right now. There could be. I've often thought, again, this is the kind of place that could be a resort as well as a place with great, agriculture, things like Jaffa oranges and other fruits are really terrific. And that's a good area for making them. But what are you doing to help those folks find a way to survive? That's what I don't see going on right now. And
it has to be a discussion on both sides of the political aisle, right?
And and everybody has to care about the needs of the Palestinian people, and not just in terms of military and political leaders who have an ego that says, well, we will have this kind of state. What good is your kind of state if your people are dying, and they're dying largely because of you and your policies? That's the kind of question I would have. And what do you do to improve that circumstance? That's for them. This would be true on the West Bank. I think on the West Bank you have two issues, one of which is the issue of people who are moving throughout the West Bank in order to build up these settlements where, why are you building settlements? These, you want to live there, I understand. But why are you doing this instead of settling other parts of Israel? They're basically making it impossible for people on the West Bank to have, their own farms and such. This also has to be resolved. That you come.
You mentioned the West Bank. Think about the people in Bethlehem. Not to interrupt you, we have about 30 seconds left, right?
I know.
And how there's so many problems in Bethlehem because of their restrictions as well.
Right. This, what is going to be a more just solution for everybody in the region? That has to be the concern. And I want Israelis to have a wonderful life, but I also want Palestinians to have a wonderful life. There are, still about 1% of Christians over there, but mostly are Muslims, but they're mostly family people. And how do they deal with their family needs? This is something that most people should have a clear sense. We want to take care of families because they're people in need.
Right.
Children need jobs, school, all this. And not education in terror, but education in how to live in the modern world.
Yeah, and you know what? This is our Catholic perspective, and what we are concerned with as Catholics to make sure the people, the dignity of the human person is taken care of. But it certainly is raising eyebrows and causing more people to think maybe differently and approach it differently. Thanks, Father, and we'll continue to talk with you next week. Ciao, ciao. Almost Almost 40 minutes past the hour on a busy Thursday morning, February 6th. Great to catch up with Tim Graham, executive editor of MRC's Newsbusters. MRC, of course, is the Media Research Center. Check out the great website, too, of both the Media Research Center and Newsbusters, which I love. I must go to it 3-4 times a week just to find out what's happening. Tim, I loved your piece regarding PBS, but before we get into that, and we'll try to go over the several reasons, the 5 reasons, solid reasons, by the way, which you documented excellently, I must say. I want to talk about all of this information that's coming out now regarding certain media outlets actually being paid by the federal government. I mean, it's even worse. Just when you think it can't get any worse in terms of the media acting as operatives and advocates for the extreme left, then you see this news about money going to certain outlets. I mean, did this surprise you even at the Media Research Center? Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I would say yes, because this has been something we've seen in Washington for a long time, this sort of, I saw this, that Politico was getting huge money from the U.S. Agency for International Development. My first thought was, must be advertising. And then it was, no, it's subscriptions. And National Journal, like 30 years ago, you'd pay $2,000 a year for a magazine, which is absurd, except they're reporting from inside the federal government. It's sort of like the deep state report, where the bureaucrats all read about each other. So that's what this Politico Pro thing is. But yes, you have to think at some point, when you look at the kind of money the federal government was pumping into something like Politico, it's got to have some sort of influence on the way they report on the government. I just don't think you can look at it any other way.
They're too closely tied together. And then the other big story we were discussing during the break is CBS releasing the full interview with Kamala Harris, and also the transcript, which shows how they were just so deceptive in the way they presented her answers. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, this is a win for Donald Trump for having the audacity to sue, which they all said, frivolous lawsuit. Well, obviously, no, what it shows is 60 Minutes is a frivolous news program.
Exactly.
And the problem with, we all know they slice and dice. We've seen it. Donald Trump exposed this in 2020, where we had that embarrassing Leslie Stahl saying, well, we can never confirm the Hunter Biden laptop stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so, we all knew this was why they didn't want to share it with us, is that the transcript and the video was going to show you how they carefully tried to cut it in a way that made her look good. And we all know that if Trump had submitted to an interview, they would have done the opposite to him.
Exactly.
What I'm really curious about now, Teresa, is I really want to see the last Scott Pelley interview with Joe Biden in 2023. Let's see all of that and see how much babbling they cut out of it.
What I find fascinating is you and I, having been old media people, not that we're that old, but we've been around the block a few times when it comes to secular media, and now, of course, for me, Catholic media, and you with the great work you're doing at MRC. But what I find fascinating is how many times did we hear in the newsrooms, even in J school, they used to talk about libel and slander and defamation, how difficult it is to take a case like that to any court, to any court of law, especially if you're a public person. And who's a bigger public person than Donald Trump right now in the news? And yet he seems to really be exposing successfully the problems that we've known about on the inside, and I think people are finally waking up to it, what's going on in the media. I mean, it is incredible to me that there have been so many settlements, successful settlements, and for not just Trump, there have been other cases as well where people are saying, enough, basta, this is ridiculous, where they're just playing fast and loose with the facts, just to push an agenda.
Well, this trend started with Nicholas Sandmann, who is not a public figure and who was smeared. The worst thing he did was smirk, and he was smirking because he didn't know what else to do in this situation. Somebody screaming in his face. I think most of us would have had a different reaction than smirking. And then we have now this CNN case that we've been following for months with Zachary Young. Zachary Young was not a public figure, and so that's where they get in trouble. Now, they'll call Trump's lawsuits frivolous just because New York Times versus Sullivan set such an impossibly high standard that you have to prove malignant intent. You have to prove malice. Well, in the Zachary Young case, you got in there and you could see all the malice. They were talking about how they'd like him dead like a cockroach.
Right.
And this is why, I have to say, Teresa, this is why George Stephanopoulos and ABC settled with Trump, because they didn't want everybody reading the kind of emails that were going on inside ABC demonstrating their malice. Everyone can see the malice on television.
I really think, and I want to get into the PBS thing because that's a whole other story, but I do believe that people are finally, because if you look at the people, the way the country went in terms of the voting, and so many who weren't even describing themselves as conservatives voted differently, that people have had it. And the ratings are proving that out. How many times do we have to see? I think there's been 3 major stories even this week looking at the ratings of CNN and MSNBC, and of course Jim Acosta is gone now, and he was going to be moved over, relegated to overnights, which is, the graveyard shift for anybody who knows anything about broadcasting. But he's done, and you see all these people who made it their business, made it their job to be, again, advocates for the left versus just do your job. Just report. Don't go all right or all left. Just give us the facts, for crying out loud.
That would be the old-fashioned thing, and we haven't had that for a while. Yes, I think that the election results, what they said to people was, there was a bunch of voters, the ones in the middle, basically were saying, I'm tired of your noise. I want to change. You can't just try to put Trump in prison and think that's going to end everything. You can't run around screaming convicted felon for months. We've got more important things going on in this country than your noise. And I think that's really what they said. We obviously still believe, because we're here on this every day at Newsbusters, that people's opinions can still be formed or swayed by these so-called mainstream media. But you're absolutely right that, maybe we're succeeding in getting people to consider that what they're getting is really advertising badly disguised as news.
They're digging in their heels, Tim. By the way, we're talking with Tim Graham, executive editor of MRC's Newsbusters. They're digging in their heels, the media, and just repeating the same thing, the same mantra, the same messaging that they had throughout, the last 4 years of the Biden administration, and their ratings continue to go down. How much longer can they survive? My only thought is, and you and I know this, being in media, somebody must be funding them, because the advertisers are not happy with the ratings, because that's how ratings come about. They want the audience. They want the perfect demographic. They want to know which section, which day part is going to get me the most, bang for my buck. The ratings keep going down. How long can they keep doing this?
Well, I think they're still making money, especially on the morning programs, and obviously the morning programs don't have as much news in them most days. Certainly, you can see that CBS Evening News, they've tried to remake it to look more like the PBS NewsHour or something. They're trying something different, but they're not really changing the tilt. Some people are complaining there's not enough anti-Trump in the new CBS Evening News, but it's kind of funny. They are struggling, but what's disturbing is this whole tendency, especially in print, like just consider the Associated Press. They're taking major money from, say, people who want climate coverage. Well, they don't want just climate coverage. They want a specific kind of climate coverage. And that's what you're getting. This is certainly what you see with public broadcasting, where, they'll announce, NPR will announce to you on the hour all the liberal and leftist foundations that are funding their news coverage and expecting. George Soros has funded NPR. They expect a certain spin. Yeah. They know what they're getting.
And this leads us to the big story that I brought you on for this morning, but there's so much going on in terms of the media and the news in general. Defunding, taking the funding away from public broadcasting. I can't agree with that more. It's out of control. And these are our tax dollars, ladies and gentlemen, that go toward this. It is, if you look at the story of Uli Berliner. He was a self-identified liberal, and he quit his job because he couldn't stand the bias and the advocacy that was going on in a newsroom.
Well, yes. Now let's underline. He tried to stay, but what had happened was people stopped working with him. They literally refused to work with him. So he was sort of forced out, but, he'd obviously been in this struggle for months with people. I really think in Uli Berliner's case, it broke with October 7. And, NPR, if you listen to NPR this morning, they were touting the Nakba for the Palestinians. They're just so remarkably leftist And it has gotten worse. We've been meeting with some folks downtown on the Hill about what we're seeing, and I try to tell people this is the worst. The current iteration of the PBS NewsHour with Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz is so much worse than the old McNeil Lehrer.
Oh yeah,
people would call it boring and stodgy. These people, as we've seen, we did a study. Their coverage of transgender issues was 90% the views of transgender advocates. And the opposing view, Teresa, was Billie Jean King, the openly gay tennis star, who, like Martina Navratilova, said, "I don't want men in women's tennis." That was the right-wing view. But the PBS NewsHour today is remarkably overuses the term far right to describe us and can't find a far left to save their life. This version of the PBS NewsHour is the worst yet, and because so many conservatives don't watch it, they don't know how bad it is.
And they don't know how much money is going. They may know that it gets funding from the government, but how much money do they get now, Tim? Do you know?
The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is presently pulling about $535 million a year, so that's $500 million. Now, in terms of an enormous federal budget, it's tiny, which is why PBS and the NPR have always looked at Republicans and said, you don't really want the pain of trying to oppose us in public opinion when it's such a tiny amount of money. Brian Stelter is out on Twitter now saying, why would you have a fight over such a tiny amount of money? And it's like that tiny amount of money is all about defeating Republicans and putting Donald Trump in jail. That's, they're all about fiercely protecting abortion and the LGBTQ agenda and the racial justice left. This is what they're all about. So it's not just about the money, but remember now, PBS and NPR aren't just getting money from CPB. They're getting money from all over the government. I'm sure they're probably getting money from the Agency for International Development. I found funding to this WNYC in New York City from HUD, from the Community Block Grants Program. And they're getting money from the Education Department, the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. So there's federal money pouring into it all over the place. And yet NPR will run around and say, well, we only get 2% directly from the federal government. They
sound like Planned Parenthood, don't they? In terms of how much money they get, right?
Yeah. They're right down the edge with Planned Parenthood. NPR has done two very squishy Valentine stories about the transgender deputy secretary of HHS. I call him Richard Levine. He calls himself Rachel. But just completely one-sided things about how gender-affirming care for children is just the most healthy thing, and there's no opposing point of view even mentioned with our tax dollars.
Yeah. It's got to stop. Tim, thanks so much. And I want to encourage people, because you have the points that you made about NPR and PBS. You have it in a really good summarized video. So there's 5 points in terms of why we need to defund public broadcasting. Check it out on Newsbusters. It's a great website, and, of course, the Media Research Center. Tim Graham is executive editor of MRC's Newsbusters, newsbusters.org. Tim, always great to speak with you. I have to have you back. There's a couple other stories I wanted to discuss. But I can remember the day when I was in J school that NPR, you probably remember this too, because I think we're pretty close to the same age, where we were taught that was an example. Remember how they always did such a beautiful job with natural sound and sound bites, and the way they were so creative in their writing, and their audio was very visual in your brain because of the way they wrote and the sound they used. And so this was like, years ago when you or I were just out of J school. But what a shame, because they really used to do some very, very good pieces in describing different really beautiful stories, and it's all now about politics and only one side of the issue. So we appreciate the great work of the Media Research Center. We'll be right back on a Thursday. Let you know what's coming up on a Friday. Stay tuned.
People ask how they can care for older family members who can't fully care for themselves. One answer is Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Visiting Angels assists adults nationwide with 600 locations to continue living at home and not have to move into a nursing home. Their caregivers provide assistance in hygiene, meals, and light housework. Services are provided up to 24 hours per day, and you can select your caregiver before service begins. More information, including franchise opportunities, is on the web at visitingangels.com.
Food for the Journey, Sister Ann Shield.
Open your hearts to the way in which God wants to shepherd you. By daily prayer, you learn to hear His voice, and He will shepherd you, and then you're going to be in a position to help others draw near to the Good Shepherd. But we need to learn how to hear His voice. And part of the way we do that is by reading Scripture every day until we begin to see what God's priorities are, and we make those priorities our own. We repent from the ways and the times in which we just want to do our own will, and we truly more and more are converted that we want God's will, God's way, God's timing. And when the Good Shepherd really leads our lives, then we're in a position to hear His voice more because our lives are converted. They're shaped by His priorities. And so that enables us to hear the voice of truth much more clearly and the voice of love much more clearly. As we give up our selfishness, we are drawn into truly intimate union with Him. May God give you that grace.
Food for the Journey with Sister Ann Shields can be now heard on the audio archives page at AveMariaRadio.net.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Catholic Connection on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Coming up tomorrow, of course, it is a Friday, so we'll have Doug Keck, our Chief Operating Officer and President, talking about the inside word, giving you the inside scoop of what's happening on our network and, of course, online and radio and all that good stuff, so you can make a note of it and be prepared for all the good programming. Fact Check Friday, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about tomorrow because there's so much going on with the media, as we just mentioned with Tim, but we'll try to get as much in as possible. And then closing with Andrea Picotti-Bayer, we're going to talk about school choice for Catholics and what's happening with the new administration. Talk to them. Ciao, ciao.
You've been listening to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo. Catholic Connection is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Our producer is Andrew Kruchek. For copies of this program or for more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net. That's AVEMariaRadio.net. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for another edition of Catholic Connection.